Thank you very much. Very hard act to follow. I'd like to call upon our esteemed co-panelists. The first person I'd like to call upon is Rumeysa. Rumeysa is a Turkish parliamentarian and the youngest parliamentarian in Asia. Also, Anas Yilman, who is the Secretary General of IFSO. And Munir Akkari from London, who worked at the Middle East desk at the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take it very lightly. I think we've got 25-30 minutes. We're generally speaking young people. I'm losing hair, but we're generally speaking young people. And so we thought we'd, in a very youthful fashion, try our best to be very practical in the 20-25 minutes that we have. So what we decided to do as a group is have a think about, given our experiences on the forefront of many organizations. We have someone who worked at the European Parliament, someone who's leading IFSO, which is a conglomerate of Muslim student organizations, more than 800 across 64 countries, and the youngest parliamentarian in Asia, people who are genuinely at the forefront of key organizations. We thought we'd decide and talk about 4 key principles that as young people who are trying to create positive change, what are those 4 key principles that are non-negotiable? There's a lot of change around us. The environment is changing, political discourse is changing, but what is it that we have to hold dear to our hearts in order to navigate through the blurriness that is modern society? So I'm going to start off with the first non-negotiable. I'm going to be very open with you guys that we actually discussed what those principles are. Not all of us agreed, so there'll be a bit of pushback. But in the end, we've got 20 minutes to confirm those 4 things. The first thing that I would like to bring forward, I was the former general coordinator for Sharq Youth, and we were talking about the 8 principles that make up the Sharq Youth Forum. And the first key principle that I would like to bring to this table is that sense of hope. No matter how difficult it is to navigate modern society, no matter how difficult the challenges seem to be, that first core principle is that we must believe that the future is better than the past. We can't live in the past and hope to return to the past, to the glory days of the past. We must be hopeful for a better future. So that first principle that I'd like to bring forward is we must have that sense of hope of a better future.
I think as young people, having a sense of hope has to come with a sense of resilience, right? Many a times we're knocked down to our knees. There are so many challenges in society, but also we live in a world where a lot of political rhetoric is very demonizing to young people. We're called the laziest millennial. We're called, the snapshot millennial, this and this and that. How do we maintain resilience in a very polarized political environment?
Not that I have like a definite answer, but I would say, just having heard Dr. Anwar, who went through that heavy trough of his life, it's having that hope in a better future. There's 40% unemployment in the Middle East for young people. There's a lot to complain about for young people, young Muslims, young people in the Middle East. But that sense of hope must create that resilience. I'd like to actually ask Rumeysa, what was it that drove you into the Turkish parliament? What was your path to parliament? Was it that sense of hope? And what did you hope to achieve?
So I didn't get involved in politics because I wanted to. I was passionate about 2 things, one of which is debating, which is something I discovered at college. And second passion of mine was actually helping people and making them happy. So these two passions, they led me to actually change my life to a direction which I describe as following my passion, not a position. So I've never really, it wasn't something I could dream of too, because it was beyond my expectation. But I can say that I've never really went for a position, because I know that passion is what makes us, not our position. If you just believe the otherwise, I believe you're going to be nothing when that title or position is taken away from you. So my story is a little different. So as I told you that I was passionate about two things. And so these two things led me to be active in NGOs. I was active in 5 NGOs when I was a student. At the first year of college, I started being a part of an NGO that supported youth engagement, empowerment. And I was active in debating. So the story is that I had this big event, which was the finale of a debating competition, which I organized with my team. So we had this big event, and we had this news that our president was going to attend that event, which took our event to a, believe me, totally different level at one night. And of course, debating in my country too, Diwali given definitely changed. So I had this chance to make a speech before the audience and before the president. So after 2 weeks, when I was back to reality at my student's house, studying for my finals, which was French exam, as I remember. So I just started to receive tweets about myself and calls from people congratulating me to have been nominated and elected as the executive board member, which is the highest body of a party in Turkey and everywhere. So it was a big surprise for me. I even Googled my name, believe me, to see if there was anyone else named Rumeysa Karak other than I was, because to be honest, it was really surprising. It wasn't about me. It was just having a president, having a young activist who had no political connections with anyone, who had no one in her family who was a politician, or let's say who was trying to be a politician in his executive board. So I believe this is huge. This is so important, giving young people chance to represent themselves, to give their ideas to the platforms. And I had this chance to work with them closely for a year. And I focus mostly on youth and educational projects, which is my focus areas. And then I was nominated and to represent Istanbul, which is ethnically the richest city in Turkey, and where I grew up and where I was born. So now I'm here as a representative of the city, but I can say that it wasn't my hope to be in politics, but I had hope for my passion. So it didn't really change. It didn't change due to my platforms. I felt exactly the same satisfaction in streets when I was cleaning streets 5 years ago for environment that I felt in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. Because I believe platforms may change, but it shouldn't be our passion that changes due to our titles.
Thank you. Yes. I'm actually going to stay with you, Rumeysa. If we agree, with your permission, that the first non-negotiable is that sense of hope, what would you say is a non-negotiable in your mind for young people?
I think what is so important when we talk about young people is to be on the table when we're the ones who are discussed. So we can call it as participation in general. Because we have no other choice but to participate, to be there I believe. So I think participating or just being in the decision-making mechanism, it's not just important because it's not just important for young people. It's important for everyone else in the nation. So I believe young people put a lot of bring a lot of extension to the platforms they're a part of. There are some reasons. Firstly, I do believe representation matters a lot. So as it is absurd for, let's say, 50 men speaking about the rules that's going to affect women, it is as absurd for older people to discuss the rules that's going to affect young people, because no one can understand you, young people, better than you do. So as those who are affected, I believe you deserve to affect too. Secondly, I think it is really crucial that young people are not used to the status quo. So we tend to criticize what is being done better than those who are used to it. So this criticism actually leads to improvement, I believe. So having young people on table actually leads improvement because they're not used to what older people are used to. And the third thing I think is the very important thing is what makes young people young, as I believe, is taking risks. So young people, they are courageous enough to fill the gaps, which may be described as risky areas. Or I don't think people in his 40s or 50s would be courageous enough to lock themselves in their garage to found Apple like Steve did. So I think it's so important to take risks while we still can. And there were so many things that I wanted to mention. One of them is that I think young people are the backbones of the society, but sometimes they're seen as an active part of it. So that is what we should change, I believe, in the world. We shouldn't see them as like as inactive parts of it. And I think we're not future adults to get ready to work in the future. We also have today. It's not the future that only belongs to young people. We should own today too. And last thing that I want to mention today is that, we should be in decision-making mechanisms. Young people should be there, women should be there because of their strong arguments, because of their ideas, because of their new extension and original interpretations, but not because of their gender or their age. I believe we're more than our dates of birth.
Fair enough.
I think also thank you for raising this principle, participation. And as you mentioned, it's not only for young people, but it should be raised for the whole society. And if I may add in the participation principle, I think especially when we think about the refugees and how they integrate in the society, I think the participation is the thing that we don't need to negotiate on it. And there is no way but to engage with the society. So the refugees, it's a key point nowadays in the different societies, and their participation, I think, will be the main principle that, in place of being a burden in the societies, they can join the society itself. And of course, as locals also, they need to open the door for the participation.
So we're saying as a group, our second kind of non-negotiable of 4 is that sense of participation. As young people, we have no choice but to engage.
Exactly.
And, to your point about refugees or minority groups, sometimes there's a glass ceiling, sometimes it's difficult to engage in society, but our message to them, I guess, is you've got 2 choices. You can sit on the peripheries of society and you can wait for things to change, or you can push through and try your best, but you have no choice but to engage, is what we're saying.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's number two. I'm gonna. We haven't heard much from Munir. I'd love to hear from you as to what you feel is a very important non-negotiable in our lives.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest a non-negotiable for young people, but it's very specific to this generation. It's not timeless, it's not universal, but it applies to everyone in this room. And considering that our generation is the most connected, the most global, the most informed generation ever, a non-negotiable should be access. Access twofold. Access to information and access to the negotiation tables and the corridors of power. Our generation has disrupted, for the first time in history, the hierarchy of decision-making, the bureaucracy of policies, of democratizing power. We spoke extensively about power yesterday and how where power is found. And a very important element in power is the power of an idea that is able to collect behind it many voices and to disrupt those norms. So, with access, I want to emphasize that we are the generation of social media, of access, of being online almost 24/7. Nobody should be able to take away our access to that, but also to our access to information, our right to have information of what's happening around us, what's happening to us, and what is being said or decided for us in the negotiation tables, and for us to be a part of that. There's a challenge that comes with that, of course. There's a lot of information, and our ability to understand where we fit within that information is also important.
Does anyone want to add anything to that point? But as I understand, the point is we have to make use of that access that we have as young people.
I remember us having debate last night about this issue. What about fake news? Munir, we live in the era of fake news. Like, are we responsible as young people to decipher, to filter that information?
Yeah,
or access us all?
So, I think that's a very interesting point, and it's brought up a lot, especially in the last several Western elections where the idea of fake news has really disrupted the status quo. And I think the responsibility is twofold. First of all, it is the responsibility of every single one of us to understand how do we verify information. There are targeted campaigns around the world for you to try to convince you of ideas, to try to disrupt your flow of life. And it is your responsibility to, number one, learn how to verify the truth. Learn how to verify the truth. Understand what a credible source is and what a non-credible source is. And then understanding that if a source is not credible, we should not pass that information on until we have verified that information. But I also think there's a responsibility on the institutions, the platforms that promote or make fake news accessible. Media, for example, is designed in a way to make you click. Headlines are written in a way sometimes inaccurate so that we can click, and it's designed in a way to generate income. Social media platforms as well, their algorithms are designed in a way where we can click and click and click and like and endorse, etc. And sometimes it promotes information that is incorrect. Sometimes it promotes information that is disruptive or that is perhaps that can rot an entire generation's mindset on versus ideals. And there's a responsibility on those institutions, but also on government and policy to hold those platforms and media responsible when they make those mistakes.
Can I just jump in on the point of access? Access of information, absolutely, but also making use of opportunities and making use of the access that we might get. You know, just 5 years ago, it would have been impossible for a 22-year-old to be a parliamentarian in Turkey. But just 5 years ago, it would have been impossible for a woman with a hijab to be a parliamentarian in Turkey. There was an opportunity that arose with the referendum, and now we have a woman who is 22 years old, who has a hijab in parliament. So it's making use of that opportunity and the access that you have. I'm going to pass on to Anas to summarize our final, fourth and final principle that are non-negotiables for young people.
Especially after listening to Anwar Ibrahim, I think we need to point out about the education, and especially with the, I think it's nowadays, it's very needed than ever before, and the intellectual independence thinking, I think, is now important because of the advent of social models and its inherent biases is now pushing people to, you know, to be siloed in their thinking and their opinions. And I think education must counterbalance between this contradiction minds and the conflict of the extreme minds and you know, the prominent in the modern society. It's just popularism, idealism, and racism, and again anti-immigrant sentiment, etc. And I think youth is missing the ability to be able to, you know, to entertain as well as to analyze and harmonize in their opinions and thinking. And I think these concepts and the opinions, in order to, you know, to foster people between the differing communities and hopefully to build a better future, it needs that. How I'm going to call it is the positive disruption, if I may say. I mean, if we say Uber today is positively disrupt the industry of transportation, I think youth nowadays needs that the intellectually independent and get rid of this Eurocentric or McDonaldized education that kept our mind and occupied, and we need to, you know, to find the platforms of the comparative education that we can see the other alternative thinkings.
So we're saying our fourth and final principle is that sense of positive disruption.
Positive disruption is very, very important.
Breaking the status quo, I guess, being you know, catalyst for change.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to summarize those 4 points. Basically, on my right we have Munir, who worked at the Middle East desk at the European Parliament. We have Anas, who heads an organization of 800 Islamic student organizations, and we have Rumeisa, the youngest parliamentarian in Asia. And we're saying our key principles as we navigate the murky waters that is modern society is, number one, to have that internalized sense of hope in a better future, that we must believe the future is better than the past. Number two, that you have no choice but to engage, that sense of participation, being part of society now, not waiting until you become an adult, but being part of society is a non-negotiable. And number three, I believe, was making use of the access that we do have as young people in a globalized world. And then finally, internalizing that sense that we as young people need to create unique ways of thinking. So becoming a positive disruptor in this world. I believe our time's out, so we were going to ask a few questions, but I think we're going to have to pass on that particular segment. Yeah, I'm getting nods from it. I'm getting kind of like
Can I add
cringe
something?
there.
One?
There's no more questions.
Yeah,
But
so
feel
I
free.
just want to mention that we have received Dato Anwar Ibrahim in Turkey, and then I've asked him, what was the passion that kept you, in the prison and then with the hope? He said, I have never, ever lost the hope and the support of the youth. And I think that how he mentioned it again, replace of saying suffering in the prison, I was so inspired by him saying resting in the prison.
Okay, we're not going to go to questions, but just a final remark from Munir and also from Rumeisa, and we'll end with that.
Sure. I want to dedicate this message to everyone attending this conference. We have to understand that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And everyone who's present here today has an amazing opportunity at the doorstep and beyond. And we have to grasp that opportunity. We have to build on the opportunity. We have to build networks. We have to connect with each other. We have to build projects and go home and enrich that network and sustain that. And only that way we can really realize the fruits of great events like this. Thank you.
Okay, so we tried to tell you about our story today, but I believe there are so many good stories of yours too. And I believe there are so many distinguished guests around the audience too. So I want everyone here today to know that you have a room in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey and a friend who is open for international projects and who is looking forward to meeting you all and have international projects with you, and call her as your teammate. It was so good to be here with you in Malaysia, and hope to meet you all in person too. Thank
you. I'm so thankful to Al Sharq Youth Forum for inviting us here and give us this opportunity. And it's always nice to come back to Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.